Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. My name is Michelle Letts. I'm the Director of Support Services for the School District of Springfield Township. Very excited to welcome you to tonight's family information session. This is called Preparing Your Child to Launch, and it's presented by Be Part of the Conversation. I want to thank Kim Porter and the Be Part of the Conversation family for their longtime partnership with our district and the larger community. You've probably seen their advertisements at multiple school districts and community events. They provide family-friendly workshops on a variety of relevant topics. So hopefully you find the information presented tonight useful for you and your family as you attempt to navigate 21st century parenting. So without further delay, I'm going to turn this over to Kim and be part of the conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Lutz. Appreciate it. And thank you very much for the partnership. We have really loved it. This is our fourth program with you this year, just for this school year. So this is our last one with you this year, but we will be at your wellness fair, I think, coming up. We'll have a table there. So thank you for that invitation. And I hope we get to meet some of you on that evening. So thank you for that. We are recording this program, as you probably noticed when you joined. Please don't worry about that as far as privacy. Any questions that you ask later on, if your image comes up for some reason, none of that will be included in the recording, the finished product. And so we do hope that you'll ask questions. We have some terrific presenters this evening, but we really hope that you will take advantage of being here live, because we are recording. It will be available on our YouTube channel, but we really love that you're here so you can interact with us and ask some questions. There will be a survey that comes up at the end of this program. Please take a moment to complete that survey, even if you've done it before. It helps us so much. It really makes an impact for us to show the outcomes of these programs. Was this helpful? It helps us to know also what topics you would like to hear about in the future. We share that with Dr. Lutz at the end of the school year so that she can see what was popular as far as requests for future topics. And this is the follow-up page for tonight's program. My colleague Bob Lamb is on this program as well, our Director of Operations and Programs, and he's going to put some links in the chat for you. But this is the follow-up page, conversation.zone/parents, and that is where you'll find the recording for tonight's program and lots of other resources on our website. I hope you'll take advantage of all the stuff that we have there to offer. But you'll find that and many, many of our other upcoming programs on our calendar, conversation.zone/calendar. We also have a YouTube channel. That's where tonight's program will land once it has processed and finished recording. We have probably now about 140 recorded programs there. So lots of ways to take a deeper dive into specific topics that we address. We also have some support group meetings for parents who are like me. I'm somebody with a child in long-term recovery. My child is 35. He's my child, but he has been sober for a long time. But I sure needed these support group meetings when I was in the soup and really worried and concerned about his substance use. These meetings take place 5 days a week. There are 21 meetings every week. About half of them are online and about half are in person. You don't have to register or anything like that. They're all free to attend. You can just click on any of these buttons and get the details about the meeting. We also have a family recovery course that we are really proud of. This has been very impactful for a lot of families who identified that their child at any stage in their life has struggled with a substance use disorder. So it's a 3-part course, also completely free to attend. The course is capped at 12 people, and it's got 2 instructors who are peers like myself. I'm one of the instructors, but we will send you a manual with information, and you'll follow along with that in the course. But we've had really great outcomes with this, and I encourage you to check that out if you or someone you know feel that you would benefit. So I'm really excited to introduce our 2 speakers. We'll start with Lizzie, and actually, Lizzie, I'll ask you to introduce Mike since you know Mike. But our guest speaker tonight is Lizzie Lopez, LPC. She is the co-founder and chief clinical officer at Synergy Houses. Lizzie found her passion for helping others through her own personal experience with healing and recovery. After receiving her master's in clinical counseling, she started her career working with adolescents struggling with substance abuse and mental health issues. She became skilled at helping clients identify the why underneath their substance use. She strives to provide compassionate care that can lead to relational repair in order to help clients cultivate meaning. So thanks for being here, Lizzie.
Yeah, thanks for introducing me, Kim. And as Kim said, I manage and direct an intensive outpatient program called Synergy. It's really interesting, this topic because our clientele, they are people that are, we would say, like failure to launch, struggle to thrive, young adult population that a lot of them have had to take medical leave from college because of their substance use and mental health issues. So this is kind of a topic near and dear to my heart and like the population that we treat at the program that I run. I'd also like to do a little plug for Kim where they did the family recovery course for a lot of our families, and our families had a great experience with that and found it truly helpful. So I can't say enough about that program that this organization offers. So about the topic tonight, I kind of just wanted to get into this and hopefully give you guys some skills or some knowledge that can help you navigate this tricky time. I was listening to a podcast recently about somebody that knows a lot on this subject, and he said that 17 he thinks is the hardest year to parent. And obviously that's subjective, right? He has kids, but it's a really difficult age for a lot of reasons because the parenting style needs to change, right? And if the parenting style doesn't change, then typically there ends up being a lot of issues where life skills aren't developed, responsibility, accountability, some things that would really prepare somebody to launch. The footwork hasn't been put in because the parent might still be in that supervision type role, right? And the supervision type role is necessary when kids are younger because you need to have the power as the parent. I have toddlers right now, right? So I'm often in the supervision role, but learning how to transition out of that, right? And become more collaborative and offer your kid more autonomy is really important to give them the space to fail, right? And to learn and to do things because when they launch, right, they're going to have independence and they need to have those skills already in place in order to be successful. So really, when we talk about preparing somebody to launch, it's really preparing them to be independent, right? So the failure to launch category is like when people are highly dependent upon their parents. And there's a pause in the typical developmental process of a young adult who's transitioned to adulthood. So if we're preparing, we're really preparing for independence, right? Which can be pretty confusing as a parent because you're still in charge of a lot of things, right? They still live in your house. But learning how to foster these skills is really important. It's also a really difficult time. Like 17 is a pretty hard age for a lot of people. There's a lot of fear present, a lot of anxiety present. There's a lot of things that are just challenging in general. And so learning how to identify what's going on with your kid and knowing where they're at to know what's appropriate and how to parent them is really important. So kids that I really see struggle to prepare to launch, right? They often show symptoms of like low frustration tolerance. So they become stressed out really easy by small tasks that are required or asked of them. They lack motivation. There might be low ambition, like patterns of procrastination, avoidance of activities that require responsibility. That's the one I really like, right? Avoidance of activities that require responsibility. Because when we talk about independence, what independence really means is that they're going to be responsible for the things that they need to be responsible for. Because if they've launched and they've gone to college or they've gone away or whatever, the idea is that you're not doing so many things for them. And if that hasn't happened before they go, it's going to get tricky because there's a learning curve to all of these things. So that's why accountability is so important. So another thing we see is there's a lack of accountability if they're struggling with this, poor social or communication skills, and just overall isolation. Um, this is really tricky given COVID because we're still seeing the ripple effect of that, right? So there's still a pretty decent developmental delay that I feel for a lot of kids because that was such a radical thing that happened that shifted developmentally what kids were experiencing, and especially kids in high school. Those are the social age, like that's the social development stage where they're trying things out, they're engaging with different peers, they're doing social activities, and COVID stopped all that. So most kids were developmentally impacted to some varying degree. So when it comes to what do? I'm a parent, I want to prepare my child to launch, I think it's really important to look at your parenting style, right? If you look at your parenting style, you can kind of know, am I falling into some of these traps that are pretty easy to fall into? I was listening to this podcast recently, and the psychologist was saying the age to start with this stuff is when somebody is 3, right? And I was laughing with Kim and Bob before, because like my kids are 4 and 3, and my daughter really likes to dress herself right now, but it takes us like 15 more minutes in the morning, and I have to get to work, right? So it would be way easier for me to just get her dressed. But that's the parenting style that I don't want to do. She needs to learn these skills so she can be more independent. And what that looks at like at 3 and what that looks like at 17 can be different, right? Because at 17, it might be like, hey, does your kid know how to like call the doctor and schedule an appointment, right? One of the first things I would do when I got an adolescent in my care was I would have them schedule with me, right? And then have them be responsible for going to tell the parent when the appointment is, or have them be responsible to access the family calendar so they know if their mom can bring them or not. So it's these small little things that you can do. You know, I could have walked out of my office and just went to the parent and say like, hey, can you pull up your calendar? But it's not teaching the kid anything. And a lot of preparing them to launch is really teaching, right? And that also looks like a lot of failures, like teachable moments. Most people like learn, they get feedback when they don't do something correctly, right? But if you don't give them the space to do that, and you fall into the trap of like helicopter parenting, that's a pretty common one that a lot of people know, right? It eliminates the ability for people to make mistakes, and then it eliminates the ability for them to learn, right? So that's why it's really important to create space. So as a parent, if you're identifying sort of like, hey, what's my parenting style? I think it's helpful to think through like 3 different types of lens. So I mentioned this before, but Dr. McConville, he wrote a book, and it's literally called Failure to Launch, right? Because his practice became so prevalent with these 20, 22-year-olds that kind of just didn't know what they were doing in life, and their parents were calling for therapy. And so he says, like, if you look at the parenting style, there's 3 different types of parenting style. There's supervision, where the power is with the parents, right? Which is typical when kids are younger. Then there's negotiation, where there's shared power, right? And then there's consultation. So when your kids are in high school, you should almost be fully in consultation. You'll never be 100% in that, but consultation really means the parent is a resource. They are conceding that the kid can make their own decisions, but of course there's limits, right? So it's not like all hands are off. It's just saying that like, hey, part of this, there's a back and a forth. There's some trust being given that you can make some decisions. There's some mistakes that you need to learn from, but I'm not telling you like what major you need to pick in college, right? That would be like a supervision parent. It's more of a collaborative approach that invites them, the kid, to think for themselves, which is really important, because if they're going to launch, they're essentially going to be by themselves, right? And not that they can't call, but they're going to be needing to make daily life decisions during free time of like, hey, do I do my homework? Do I go to class? You know, do I do these things to take care of myself? And those decisions are really important to see if they can be successful when they launch. So if you're thinking of yourself as a consultant, as a parent, the information needs to be accessed from you, right? And you're a resource rather than an authority figure. So it's more like I'm declaring that I'm available to help you with things, but I'm not going to do things for you, and I'm not going to force my agenda onto you, right? So it's like, if you have a kid looking for the job, the subtle differences, like if my kid, he's 17, right? They're currently 4 and 3, so we're a long ways off. And I'll be watching this recording probably when I'm in your space. But if they're 17 and they're looking for a job, if I'm coming at it from like a consultation type lens, I'm saying, hey, if there's anything I can do, because I've had to apply and I've gotten many jobs before, let me know. I can help you with that process. If you come at it from a supervision role, it's like, hey, you said you were going to make 3 contacts a day to find a job. Have you done that yet? Right? That's so different, right? There's so much judgment laced in the supervision, especially for a teenager who's reactive already, right? This developmental stage is reactive, rather than an invitation of like, hey, I can help you. One of the key indicators if somebody is ready to launch is they can ask for help. So like if they know how to access resources and ask for help, generally that's a good sign that they're ready to launch, because this, when they launch, right, they're going to need help. They're going to need mentors. They're going to need people to teach them how to do things that they don't know how to do. And if they don't know how to ask for help because somebody always did everything for them, right? Then it's going to be, they're going to be met with a lot of challenges. So really like things that parents can do, right, to prepare your kids to launch is like learn how to make agreements with your kids about how things are going to work in the home, right? So when they're there, can there be agreements in play that they learn some of these skills, right? And it can be as subtle as like, hey, you're going to make your doctor's appointments and then you're going to put them on the family calendar so I know when they are, but you're going to be in charge of that, right? It can also be like, hey, like here's the responsibilities that we expect you to do. Or, hey, it's summer. We expect you to have a job and we want you to save up this amount of money, or we want you to pay for your phone bill, right? Or pay for your gas with your car or whatever it might be. It's like they need some buy-in and they need some responsibility. If they don't have that when they're in the house, they're not going to go to college and all of a sudden just create it out of thin air, right? These things take time to learn and the skills take time to build. So now's the time to set the stage, right? So preparing your kid to launch is really setting the stage. So if you can focus on the development of these things, right? So like having accountability, encouraging exploration, right? Having responsibilities, setting realistic goals. Like, do you and your kid know how to have conversations about realistic goals? There's a lot of kids that I treat, right? And it's we do this activity where we're at where it's called like making a coffee, like making coffee, right? How many steps are in making coffee? There's so many steps in making a cup of coffee, right? But a lot of times people are just like, well, I want a cup of coffee, right? And they don't understand how to break down the goal. So the same thing happens with adolescents and with young adults, right? They want this goal, they want to achieve these things, but they don't know how to break it down. And then if you can help with that process, they'll understand if it's realistic or not. It's not that your kid comes to you and they give you a goal and you just kind of like scoff in their face and tell them it's not realistic. It's you look at the process and you help them learn. You help them look at what it would take to actually achieve that goal and how do we break that down? And then you let them come to their own conclusion, right? And that's how you step out of that supervision type parenting into consultation. It's like, I will work with you on the process of things. You need to look at like, okay, are we a household that encourages just exploration in general? Is there curiosity here? Are we asking questions, right? As a parent, if you can change sort of the way that you go about things, oftentimes the kid will start to change because the dynamics will change, right? So it's like, I always tell parents, like, you go first, right? You're the person with the prefrontal cortex developed. So we need you to go first so we can teach them how to do these things or how to regulate or whatever it might be. So some ways you can do that, right? The collaboration or the curiosity is like, you can always ask your kid what they need from you. Like, what do they need that might be different than what they're getting right now? And then you can also state what you need from them. It can be an invitation to collaborate on a conversation, right? Like, hey, maybe some things aren't going well right now. So like, what do you need from me that's different? And then can I have a conversation about what I need from you? You know, it can also be like, let's like let go of control so much and move towards healthier boundaries, right? So if I'm more collaborative and curious and inviting, generally I'm less controlling, right? Because I'm not being in that supervision role of like, hey, it's my way and this is how we're going to do things. It's like, hey, these are my rights and needs as a parent, and I'm going to establish those in a respectful way. I'm also going to respect yours, and I'm going to invite you to the table. So in order to prepare your kid to lunch, you have to invite them to the table, right? There's a lot of parents that they'll be at the table directing everything, but the kid's not a part of the process. And then they're not learning the things that they need to learn in order to be successful when they're outside of the home. So with control, right, it's also knowing the difference between support and enabling, which is very tricky, right? Because usually support and enabling, they kind of come from the same place. Right. And for parents that don't really know what enabling is, a definition that I like is like, are you doing something for somebody that they can do for themselves? Right. So it's really like putting your kid in the driver's seat right? And you're still there, right? You're riding shotgun as the parent, right? We're here to support you in this process, but I'm not driving the car anymore. And so like support and enabling often are confused. And I think there was a question that somebody asked before this program, right, about that, right? Rescuing, fixing, those are all kind of terms that get thrown in the enabling bucket. But it also is like, you can know if you're supporting or enabling if you look how the extended action is received and how the person responds to it, right? So oftentimes enabling, fixing, rescue, that's like a short-term solution that there's no long-term gain. It just creates more frustration down the line. Support is like in service of a long-term solution. Another thing is learn to embrace failure. So I think I've said that a lot in here. Teachable moments. I often tell like clients or parents, I say, failure is just feedback. That's all it is. It's just feedback that we need to go back to the drawing board, figure out what we didn't do and change things around so we get a different result, right? But a lot of people are scared of failure or they catastrophize failure or whatever it might be. And really embracing failure creates space for growth. And growth is what's necessary in order for people to learn how to be independent. So all of these things are essential if you're trying to get to a place where your kid can launch. And part of that is allowing for natural consequences to occur, right? So when your kid shows up as a 17-year-old and they do stuff that's irresponsible, because most 17-year-olds are irresponsible to some degree, do you allow them to experience the natural consequence of their decision, or do you come in and save them from that, right? And then they miss the teachable moment. They miss the lesson that would have naturally occurred. And hopefully the lesson would be like, oh, I don't want to do that again, right? I didn't like what happened to me. I didn't like the consequence. But if there is no consequence, it's hard for them to have that thought or that perspective. As a parent, it's really important to identify, hey, what's mine and what's theirs? What is emotionally mine and what is theirs? And this is getting at like the parenting style and the you go first and all that kind of stuff. But, you know, a lot of the helicopter parenting, the control, the anxiety that really hinder the development of independence is really about anxiety. Like it's really about the parents' anxiety and their feeling of like, well, if I don't do this, I don't know what's going to happen, right? If I don't fill out the college application, they might not get into college. Well, if you fill out the college application, they probably didn't want to get into college anyways, right? They're not showing that motivation. So doing it for them only maybe sends them off to college to fail and to waste a lot of money, right? So it's you can't like catastrophize these situations because of your own anxiety as a parent, which is really hard to do because parents only want what's best for their kids. Like when I saw the amount of attendees registered on here, you know, I was like, oh, that's so amazing. Like all these parents care so much about their kids, right? They care to learn. So it's like a lot of the anxiety is just because you care so much, but knowing how to sort out whose business is whose, right? Like what's mine emotionally and what's theirs can really put you in a place where you don't fall into the traps that hinder the development of life skills. Another thing that I see a lot of parents do is like stop falling into the power struggle, you know? So the power struggle comes especially with teenagers when there's this back and forth and it's really about control and power. And if you can decrease anger and make decisions that are appropriate based on the behavior of the kid, generally you don't fall into that, right? So if I'm looking at the behavior of my child and then making decisions appropriately, then I won't end up in a trap that we're fighting for control and power. And really just the anxiety usually gets magnified. I see a lot of parents, right? Like, and that send their kids to college when there's like substance use issues, right? Like they see the behavior, right? But they might be in their own denial or something might be happening. And so they're not making decisions based off their kids' behavior. They're making decisions based off of like, you know, unrealistic goals, hopes, dreams, whatever it might be. And then it kind of like backfires. So that's why it's like really important to appropriately assess the behavior of your child and look at like, hey, what is the behavior communicating? What is this telling me about the decisions that need to occur? Also, if you're preparing for college, the best results I've seen is when that's farmed out to another adult. Like, so if we're preparing to launch, like the mentorship part is really important. So if that piece can be farmed out to another adult, it tends to go better. So think of it like tutoring or something, you know what I mean? I'm good at a lot of things. I'm not good at math. So if my kid starts to have trouble in a math class, like I'm going to get a tutor for him in math, right? It's kind of the same thing. Like unless you're an expert sort of on the whole college process and you can emotionally remove yourself and be more objective, it gets tricky. So I think if you have the resources or the school, right, can help with that process, it tends to go better. And then you don't interject all of your opinions, beliefs, anxieties, or whatever it is, because it's kind of being handled by an outside party. Not that you're not involved in it, right? But just that like the main conversations, how those decisions are being made is with another party, because then we can step back and then they know, hey, this is how launching goes. You seek help from an outside person with decisions that are tricky, and then you can learn through the practice of asking for help. Another thing is like tools is like free time planning. So our population, we work with a lot of people that struggle with substance use issues, and they historically really struggle with what I call free time planning. So if you're trying to prepare your kid for launching, right, it's really important, like what do they do in their free time? And are they planning appropriately? Are they taking advantage of things? Or are they just sitting in their room on TikTok for hours and hours and hours, right? That's probably going to tell you something about like them being ready to launch or not. Like, because if you send them to college, what do you think they're going to do in their free time, right? So also just like looking at like free time planning, what does my kid do when they have nothing to do? What are their choices? And are they using the time constructively? So creating a necessity for using time constructively can be done by the parents, right? That's like the summer job example that I gave. Like, okay, we're not just going to have like a summer where we just hang out with our friends and we kind of do whatever we want. Like we want you to experience that too, but also, hey, like we need you to pay your phone bill. So like you need to get a job and you need to have money and you need to have responsibilities. So that's like ways that you can constructively kind of guide your child to use their free time more effectively by having sort of these agreements in the household. It's really important to remember that like the overall goal, if we're talking about preparing your kid to launch, is really like them finding a sense of purpose, them developing administrative responsibility, and them cultivating interdependence. So if that is not like, if we're not teaching, if we're not collaborative, if we're not putting them in the driver's seat, it's going to be really hard for them to find those things or to create that for themselves. There are like complicating factors. There's several reasons why people might struggle to thrive. And I think it's important to note, especially because like right now we're in a mental health crisis. So I just think that it's pretty relevant. I would also say like, just because somebody is living home with their parents doesn't necessarily mean they're in the category of failure to launch. So as costs rise, as people have more student debt and stuff like that, we are seeing more young adults live in the home. That doesn't mean they're all failure to launch though, right? Failure to launch is really this category of like, am I operating in a way that I have some autonomy and independence, although I might still need some support, right? Like I still might need my parents' help for things, but am I dependent upon that? That's a very different question. So reasons why people might struggle to thrive or they may be having a difficult time preparing to launch if they're in high school is just mental health issues. So difficulty with overall emotional regulation, executive functioning issues. I saw that in the questions as well, right? So if your kid has executive functioning issues, some of this stuff is going to be more challenging just because of the nature of that. Any trauma that they've experienced, right? And that really kind of ties into emotional dysregulation. If somebody's experienced trauma, their safety has been compromised. So oftentimes they will spend a lot of time in the fight or flight mechanism. So they'll be activated and they'll be anxious or agitated or whatever it might look like. They might be withdrawn. Perfectionism. So somebody that struggles with perfectionism might have a difficult time thriving because everything needs to be just so. And people that have a lot of perfectionistic tendencies often have a lot of anxiety. So that's kind of the underlying driving force. Expectations, whether that's theirs or their parents. I see a lot of people struggle sort of in this space because their parents have really high, rigid expectations. And then that makes them feel bad about themselves or develop shame or guilt because maybe they're not meeting them in the way that they think that the family system wants them to. It could also be their own expectations. There's a lot of really high achieving kids that have these really, really insane expectations for themselves. And often, once again, they have like a high degree of anxiety. So kind of knowing that just because like, hey, my kid's got perfectionistic tendencies and high expectations means they're going to be successful. Usually like kind of getting them into a therapist and talking about the anxiety that's driving those things can be really helpful and supportive. Poor habits just related to stress management, so how are they medicating when they have stress, right? Like, are they on their phones when they're stressed out, or are they vaping? Are they using substances? What are they doing when there's stress? Any like substance use issues or physical health issues can kind of create some difficulties in this area. And then just in general, like any like helicopter parenting, like if that's going on for somebody, generally they're going to struggle to thrive because they don't really have the space to learn and there's a lot of control. So that's typically, if any of those things are going on, you're probably going to see some challenges in this area. And then I think you can just kind of put it under like a whole umbrella of like, and also COVID, right? Like an asterisk of like, and COVID created a lot of this for a lot of people that we didn't see that before this. So if you're sort of a parent that is like, what can I do? I think if I could like summarize this for you guys, it's like create space for the client, the kid to learn, right? To make mistakes, to have not natural consequences, to be at the table, to have conversations, to own their decisions and own where they're at, right? Which is really challenging as a parent because oftentimes, right, that's not always going to look pretty, right? They're probably going to experience some things that are tough, but necessary in order to develop things like we talked about, like resiliency. And if the kid is ready to launch, they're going to have those skills. So, if you're a parent and you're like, oh, this makes a lot of sense, I'm going to learn how to invite my kid to the table, right? And step away from the supervision and become more collaborative in my approach. You're learning the right things here, right? And so I always say like it starts with the parents. And then if the parents do some changing, right, the people that are all on this call, you guys came here tonight to learn, right? If you start changing some things, there's a ripple effect of that. And hopefully then your kid will come along. A lot of the things I talked about tonight was from the book that I referenced, Failure to Launch by Dr. McConville. He's a psychologist. He has a lot of good information. If you have more questions, I would definitely check that out. He's on some podcast and stuff like that. But I hope that this information was helpful. And I know if people want to ask questions, they've asked questions before, we'll answer that after Mike tells his story of recovery.
Thanks, Lizzie. That was really awesome. But by the way, in that follow-up page, I did put Dr. McConville's book listed in there and any other, maybe if you remember that podcast, you can let me know and I'll add a link to that. Would you like to introduce Mike to everyone?
Yeah. So Mike is somebody that we invited here. He is a person in recovery. He would fall into this category of failure to launch, Mike, if that's okay to say. I work with Mike at Synergy. He is a person that I just really respect. I respect his own journey and recovery and just how he helps other people and just the amount that he has learned in his process. I'm excited to hear him speak. And he's in school to become a therapist as well. So hopefully one day he'll be in this seat talking from a different perspective for Kim. But yeah, with that, I will turn it over to Mike and Mike will tell his story.
Thanks so much, Lizzie. Very kind of you. Thank you everyone for having me here. My name is Mike Harrington and it's really an honor. I got sober September 21st of 2021. And so I have around 2.5 years of sobriety time now. And I'm 23 years old. I'll be graduating from Westchester in the spring with a psych degree. I'm looking into grad schools right now. And I'm telling you that because that's an entirely different place where I'm at today from where I was at 2.5 years ago. I grew up in Chester Springs, Pennsylvania, a Catholic family. I'm the oldest of 4 kids. And my parents, they they really cared about me and my siblings. They did a lot to help us and support us. And Lizzie's conversation really reminded me about a lot of the ways they were trying to do their best, and along the way, had a difficult parenting style that helped me get into some really unhealthy behaviors. From the moment I was born, I had some learning disabilities, and I had I had an eating disorder as a kid that prevented a lot of like good social functioning for me. So I felt from a young age a sense of alienation and the pressure to make others like me, and to fit into a mold that they wanted me to fit into. So I was very much a perfectionistic, workaholic kid who would tackle anything you put in front of me if it meant I would get validation. So I was very much involved in school, very much involved in sports. Moving into high school, I was an editor at the school newspaper for 4 years. I was a varsity sports captain. I was in 3 honor societies, and several other things that took up a lot of my time. My life revolved around pleasing my parents mostly. And I would go home a lot of the time and I'd feel empty when I was alone and I got to be alone. That was my favorite time because I didn't have to please anyone, but I was constantly paranoid about what people were thinking about me. And even when I was alone, I would set specific time periods aside to make sure that it was adequate alone time, that people wouldn't be worried about me if I didn't spend too much. I was hyper fixated on having this version of myself that would appease my parents, who were very much helicopter parents, who wanted me to fit into a certain type of person. And that went on for a while. I started to look at colleges, and I ended up going to the University of Notre Dame for psychology in 2019. And it all looked really good on the surface. I graduated with honors from my high school. I had a very good resume. I got a 34 on the ACT. I was a success story at that time. But like internally, I was very broken, and I'd been seeing a therapist for about 3 years, and I wasn't able to be honest with him about much of what was going on in my life because of fear of letting somebody in and getting help. I thought this person I was crafted to appease others, and I didn't know what to do. My family, my mother is a very mentally ill woman, who I've come to realize is an alcoholic as well. So what I thought of was my parents being perfect and supporting me. Looking back, they were imperfect people who wanted the best for me. And I had real trauma and real difficulties growing up that led me to a difficult place at that time. So when I launched into college, it was the first time I ever had true freedom in my life. And I had no clue what to do with that. I had started drinking when I was about 16, and it hadn't progressed to a unhealthy level until end of high school, early college. But there were other behaviors that I saw leading up to it that were unhealthy. I was gaining rapid weight, living a more and more sedentary lifestyle. My parents would come to me, they'd be really worried, and I'd feel even more shame about that. I didn't want to be overweight. I didn't want to be unhealthy. But I also didn't want to be the person that they wanted me to be all the time. And I wanted to be able to figure things out on my own. And I didn't have much motivation to do anything, I found, outside of what they needed from me. And that grows very exhausting. So I get to college, and quickly I find a group of people that drink the way I do. And I start calculating how much effort do I need to put into school now that I don't have supervision, so that I can get a GPA that my parents, they like it, but I can have as much fun as humanly possible. And I do that. I get decent enough grades that nobody bats an eye the first semester. But addiction, alcoholism, it's a progressive thing. Every semester I'd add a day or two to my drinking career. So I started with like 3 days a week I would drink. And then second semester I drank about 4 or 5 days a week. And then my second year of school, I was drinking every day. And then after a couple of months around the clock, when I would get up in the morning, it started to really affect my sleep. I would, and a big part of this was, drinking every day, it's really hard to keep up any kind of productivity, any kind of life. So my first 2 semesters, I did well enough. After that, I didn't know how to get out of my room. I didn't know how to interact normally with people anymore. I was terrified at all times that people were going to find out what I was doing. I was deeply ashamed of what I was doing, but I couldn't stop. Alcohol provided for me a safe haven when I first started drinking it, of some peace of mind, and my whole life revolved around me being worried about the future and people's expectations of me and succeeding. And when I used substances, I forgot about all of that, and it was the best thing I'd ever found. But at that time, it started to slowly kill me. I had suicidal thoughts up until 16, but I kept them away largely because I was drinking, I believe. I had something finally in my life that was mine, that I enjoyed. And it felt pure, and it felt good until it wasn't. And at that point in time, my second year of college, I had a suicide plan that I was not telling anyone about. And I didn't go through with it because of how much I was drinking. It was saving me, honestly. And I ended up taking a medical leave of absence from that semester of college. And I went home. I lied to my parents about what was going on. I was acting erratically. And then I broke down crying, blaming everything on COVID and their way of raising me. And I wasn't ready to admit that I had a real problem, and I didn't know how to comprehend a life without drinking. So I spent that summer not drinking at their request and my therapist's request, and it was miserable. I didn't know how to be sober and be okay. But I also didn't know how to drink and be stable and successful. I was at a real crossroads. And I got through 2 months of that summer, and then I started lying and deceiving and drinking again. And so my parents sent me back to school. They had hope. They thought it was going to go okay this time. And it was way worse than before. I crashed and burned much more quickly. And I was at a really, really dark place where every day the drinking wasn't taking away the suicidal thoughts anymore. And I wanted to jump off a building. I had a building picked out. And I would just go back and forth between what will this do to my family? I'm the oldest of 4 siblings. I can't do this to them. I need to, who's going to protect them when I'm gone? Who's going to be their big brother? And I got a call from my dad one day. My counselor had called him and said, "Hey, your son has not showed up to a single class. He hasn't been a part of this university really at all. The head of his dorm can't find him, can't track him down, and he needs help." And my dad called me, and I let loose everything. I was brutally honest for the first time in my life. And to my dad's credit, he purely just wanted to help. And he picked me up, 13-hour drive, and got me into rehab as soon as he could. And at that point, I was teachable. I didn't feel much at all. I was in a very dark place, but I had some hope for the future. That now that I'm ready to give this up and try something else, I went into rehab and entered into the recovery cycle and got to Lizzie and I's current workplace, and I stayed there for about 7 months. Stayed in a step down program for another year or so, a little bit less. And that process saved my life. I got to, especially work on how to have a relationship with my family that was healthier. I'm especially grateful for my dad for working with me to be a better dad and me working on being a better son. He got to learn a lot more about me as we went through this process, and uh, it's incredible seeing after a couple years what can happen to a family. I really believed in high school that I would never be happy if I was the person my family wanted me to be, but I'd also never be happy if they were in my life. Um, so I figured that I was just gonna detach from them and live some kind of life, drinking round the clock, having a dead end job. That looked like a better idea of happiness than being this person they wanted me to be. And today, after working in a 12-step program and going through a lot of therapy, I have gained so many skills and techniques and a new perspective on life where I get to focus on uh, working on things that are valuable to me. I used to weigh 300 pounds, and I lost about 80 pounds of that throughout my recovery. And I got to I get to live on my own with roommates now, which is crazy to me, that I can be trusted to, pay some bills, and that I can make food for myself, that I can go to the grocery store, I can hold down a job and go to classes. And at the end of the day, today, my productivity and everything I do in my life, I'm still not perfect at all. Um, but I've grown a lot in accepting the failures and learning from them. And this will be a really cool story for all of you, I think. Tonight, before this, I had dinner with my dad, and uh, I used to be terrified of telling my parents anything that I thought I was doing wrong or that I was making mistakes on. And there's a very difficult family situation going on right now with my mother possibly getting sober. And that bringing up a lot of past trauma for me and my siblings. And so the last couple weeks haven't been the easiest, and that bleeds over into some areas of my life where things aren't perfect with school right now. And I told my dad, "Hey, I'm struggling, and I'm not doing it perfectly, but here's my game plan, and I'm working on it." And um, in the past, I wouldn't have told him anything unless my life was burning down. Uh, and now today, I can come to him and say, "Hey, Dad, I have this problem, and I'm dealing with it, and I'm talking to the people in my life that help me. I don't need to come to you for everything, but I'd appreciate you being there and helping me a little bit in this." Um, and we're gonna meet on Sunday, and we're gonna get food, and he's gonna look over some stuff for me, and we'll probably sit in our hot tub for a little bit. And that's totally different than what would have happened 2.5, 3 years ago. I would be having a panic attack right now, bawling, crying, and then I'd go drink my feelings away. For any of you that are having difficulty with your children, you're really worried about them, and you want to do your best to be good parents. I want to echo Lizzie's point of you have to make room for them to grow and make room for failures to happen, learning experiences. My failure looked like entering into a very deep, dark depression and phase of addiction where I torpedoed my school career. But I didn't die, and I got back up, and on my own with their support, I got access to tools to get better and really work on myself and the family dynamic. And now I'm about to graduate college, and I call my siblings every week, and I have a very full life. And I can't describe exactly how it happened, but I know that it helps a hell of a lot to have had a parent in my dad who really listened to me throughout this process, and he didn't see me as some shitty little kid. He saw me as a human being who was really struggling, and who did want to get better and was open to it. Like on my end, once I was honest with him for the first time about everything that was going on in my life, he reacted in the most beautiful way ever, which is just, I want you to be happy. I want you to have a good life. How can I help? And on his end, that's exactly what he needed to do. On my end, you know, as a young adult, I wanted to actually have a life. And I got to experience that slowly over time through the sober living process and through being a part of a 12-step program. I was forced to ask for a lot of help and to learn how to have skills on my own, like budgeting and learning how to cook and having good sleep patterns and all the things that come with being an adult. I'm still in the process of learning, and I'm still supported by my family, but I'm trusted largely to do right things and be responsible. And when I make mistakes, that's okay. But I'm so grateful to have that family relationship, and I'm grateful to be a role model for my siblings today, and to be proud of the work I do at Synergy. It's crazy for me to be a role model for these young sober guys, and to really feel like I'm a part of something. And another point that Lizzie made that I loved was that we need these kids to find their meaning and purpose in life. And I was really living a meaningless, wandering, purposeless existence before, but I believe that there is one for everyone, and that like as parents, my parents could have never forced me to find my purpose. That I needed to be let go a little bit and figure it out on my own. I'm just grateful that I have my life today. I'm grateful that I got to speak for you guys here. And whatever problems you're facing as parents with your children, they are imperfect human beings. You are imperfect human beings who I hope you get to one day like stand on the same platform as each other and say, you know, I'm grateful we have this relationship, but act with love and try to find the part within you that can treat them with love and respect, even if you don't want to sometimes, because you don't know what's going on with them. They don't know what's going on with you. It's a difficult process. But like my story shows me that you can come from a really dark place and get out of it. So I hope the best for all of you. And I think time limit, I think that was good. I don't know if that was long enough. But thank you so much.
Beautiful, Mike. Thank you very, very much for that. And both of you did such a great job. And I'm just going to add something as a parent, because you both mentioned helicopter parents, and I think I probably fell more into the category of a snowplow parent, you know, which is definitely another way to look at this. So rather than the hovering and checking on the grades and then this and then that, I was more smoothing out the problems for them, especially because I have two children. I mentioned early on that I have a son in recovery from a substance use disorder. I also have a daughter who has had some struggles with her mental health. And what I think about now, looking back and doing so many of these kinds of programs and talking to great therapists like Lizzie and Mike in the future and all that kind of thing, you know, is that I did not want to see my child in pain. And so anything that I was doing to take away those obstacles, to move them out of the way, it absolutely comes from love, you know. But what I recognize now is I was robbing them of an opportunity to have some growth, because, you know, I believe Buddha said, life is suffering, you know, life comes with a lot of pain. And when we say that, you know, I'm going to jump in here and help with this because you're not capable of handling this, you know, you need mommy or daddy to do this for you. And I regret some of those choices that I made to like ease things. And I'll just give you a really quick story of the juxtaposition in my son's journey. You know, back when he was in high school, 16, 17 years old, looking at colleges, guess who was there saying like, don't forget that application is due on this is such a date. And I was on the website of every school he was looking at, way more than he was, I'm sure. When he ultimately went to college, didn't stay because of his substance use disorder, got sober, had a lot of recovery time, went back to school. He was now well into his recovery, well into his adult years. He went back to college, did everything, got his transcripts, he did everything 100% himself. I never looked at the website for the school he went to until he was about to graduate, and I was looking for like the commencement information. And what a difference, not only for me, but for him. He owned every bit of his education. It wasn't having mom and dad pushing and scheduling the visits and all that kind of stuff. And so my little bit of, learn from my mistakes, not mistakes. As I said, it all comes from love. But I remember saying things like, I don't want to poke the bear, because when our kids are struggling, especially, we think that they need us to do these things. But the truth is, even with my daughter's mental health stuff, the most success she has had in life was when she was geographically furthest from me. When she was doing it under her own steam, it is her mental health challenge, not mine. It is one that she's going to have to manage and learn how to cope in her life with. I can certainly be there as a support. And as I love, Lizzie, that you shared those things that the author mentioned, Dr. Colville mentioned, the consultation phase, right? I mean, I'm a consultant these days, right? So yeah, thank you both. That was phenomenal. And I think one hand went up. You all are either welcome to unmute and ask a question, or use the raise hand feature to ask a question. And also, I don't know if Dr. Lutz, you wanted to add anything.
Great information, Lizzie. Thanks for sharing. I think those are hard things. Also, thanks, Mike, for sharing your story. I think it's more powerful when it's a first person, accounting of what you've gone through.
Yeah, the thing I wanted to point out before you get to questions about Mike's story, and since I know Mike, I think he'll be okay with this, is I really wanted to point out, because it's really easy to see the kids that are like struggling in high school and behaviorally they're like a mess and they're not going to school and stuff like this. I really like in Mike's story, everything looked good on paper. Mike's going to Notre Dame, right? Like, and so it's like that, just because it looks good on paper doesn't mean we're going to get the outcome or the result that's authentic for the person. And so like Kim, when you say like, really giving them the choice, right? That's what matters, right? Because we can make things look really good on paper. I'm also one of those people, Mike, like my stuff looked really good on paper. Meanwhile, I was really struggling, right? And so I loved that you said that, right? Because I think like that's also a kid that often gets missed, right? They're living their parents' truth and not their own, which gets really tricky.
And I know we did have some advanced questions that were really terrific. And I think, Lizzie, this is a good one for you. What if executive functioning skills are very low?
I think it's just one of those things where you have to take things into consideration, right? And that's like the behavior thing that I was saying, like assess like your kid's behavior and kind of adjust accordingly, right? You still need to abide by all the things we're saying, right? It's like where you can let go of control or allow space for learning or whatever. Those are important. It will be different given your child's needs or what they're bringing to the table though, right? And so knowing, okay, like my kid's going to have a little bit different needs set rather than somebody that might not experience this issue is important. But still, then it becomes even easier, Kim, and like you said, right? If they have sort of an issue, it can become even easier to like snowplow or helicopter or whatever, because you can kind of convince yourself that they're not capable. And one thing that I know is true, because I've worked in this profession, I'm a person in recovery. It's like people are far more capable than we give them credit. I see that truth across the board, whether it's somebody that has this diagnosis or that diagnosis or this issue. It's like oftentimes we're the people like almost handicapping them by our beliefs about that. And if we kind of allow them the space to fail or to figure it out, and maybe they don't, right? Or maybe there's some pain there or some issues. It's more important, because then they're going to develop sort of a sense of self, right? So even if one of these things are at play, the information tonight is still relevant. You just might have to adjust a little bit here and there based on your kid's behavior or what's going on in the home.
I think that's awesome that you care so much about it, and that you're doing all this reading and group work and the steps yourself. I really applaud you, and I've seen it help a lot of parents both deal with it and help their children. I think the most important thing that I've seen is knowing that at the end of the day, it's not your responsibility what happens in his recovery journey, and that I hope he's doing well, and that that he wants to work the steps, and that he genuinely finds the desire to stay sober within him and knows it's the life for him. But I know that nothing my parents could have done except explain the cost of my addiction to their lives and to my siblings' lives, and could have helped me get sober truly. Like I needed to do it on my own and explore it on my own, while having a relationship with them that was where we talked about what that looked like. Like it was a very much like the instant I got out of rehab, I told my parents like, hey, I am going to need distance, because a part of the reason I'm on addiction is because this family system is not good for me. Like if I lived at home early on, I think my rates, the likelihood I would have drank again would have skyrocketed. So that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying that you're making him drink. I'm saying that this is your son's yeah, this is your son's journey, and just have faith that you're doing what you can to be a support. And if things get difficult for you and he's struggling, take a step back and use your supports, and remember that you love him, and sometimes we cannot help the people we love in the ways we want to. Like I think it's really important for you to remember how much power you have in this situation, and be grateful that he's even reached recovery, because once that happens,
I am.
it becomes a lot harder to go back and do it without the knowledge that you've received. Like if I went back to drinking, my whole life would crumble, but also like I'd have to deal with the weight of letting myself down and the people in my life that I really care about. So I think a large part of it is faith and understanding how much power you have in this situation. And
we talk, you may have heard this from one of your instructors, but we talk about these, it's actually in the Al-Anon, at the back of the book, how Al-Anon works. You know, there's the two ladders, right? Where we find ourselves pushing our child up this ladder, right? Like, you can do this, grab the next rung, you've got this. What happens when they fall? We soften the blow, they land on us, they don't feel any of this, the pain, we feel the pain, and we're down at the bottom of the ladder with them. Instead, we have to recognize that we have a separate ladder, right? Like, so our child is on their journey and we're on our journey. And if they fall, I can be empathetic or sympathetic, I can be supportive, but I'm on my own ladder, and I'm like, I got to get to my meeting, I got to go read that book. And their recovery, our recovery journey, or even parenting in general, I've learned this applies to every role for a parent, you know, every aspect of parenting, is that we are in a separate journey. They are a different human being than we are, even though they come from us in many cases. They are truly their own being, their desires. How many of us, you know, that one of my favorite things I ever heard in a parent support group meeting was when a dad said, I finally figured out I was playing my movie on my son's screen. You know, it's like, but I liked joining clubs. Why don't you join clubs? I like practicing yoga. Why don't you come to yoga with me? You know, like, they're not me, you know, they're not us. And so we have so much we can learn about all that.
I think one of the best things you can do, just like hearing your story, and I don't know if you've done this, is like get your kid assessed by a professional. Because if they're struggling with their responsibilities at school and substances are in play, you're right, you probably don't really know how much at play. And there's a difference between peer pressure and alcoholism. And so like getting assessed by a person that understands substance use issues is really important to know how, okay, like then what do we do going forward?
Mhm.
I think it's tough. I think the college environment is tough. There's a lot of binge drinking that goes on in the college environment, just in general, the culture that's there. But also just, you know, people are pressured by peers, but that's not what also creates a substance use issue. Being surrounded by certain people, I agree with that. But kind of try to figure out what's actually going on before you guys make decisions. I don't know, Mike, if you wanted to say something too.
Sure. I think what Lizzie said is I was going to echo that. That I'm not a professional yet. Hopefully, I will be one day. But that I think you did a great first step of allowing your daughter to, on her own make that decision with you to not go back. And that you'll figure out if this is a substance abuse, is this a social thing more? That like right now it might seem unclear, but I'm sure over this time, whether she's doing online school or she's working or she's going to a local college, that you'll be able to see like, oh, she's not drinking a lot, or oh, it's not a social thing. She's drinking on her own. She's seeking out alcohol and drugs to feel something within her or escape something. So I think it's really it might be unclear for you right now, but I really hope that it clears up over her time at home, and I really hope it goes well, and that you can figure it out with her.
Yeah, I think the curiosity thing is like really important, right? For parents, it's like ask questions, try to have conversations. Kim, it's kind of like what I was thinking with you when you were like, do you want to go to yoga with me? I like yoga. It's like do the reverse. Like, what do they like to do? And go do it with them, right? And try to develop some closeness with your kids so they do feel more openness and safety in telling you what's really going on with them, which is really hard, especially for like a teenage population, because they tend to kind of isolate from the family anyway. Developmentally, that's kind of normal. They're kind of like doing their own thing. However, I think like the quality time that we spend with our kids, it's like so underrated. It's like, I told you guys I have toddlers, like I build forts regularly, like, and like, I don't have to do that, but like my son loves forts and like we play in the fort and stuff like that. And it's the difference of doing that and him like, watching like a TV show or something, right? Like I'm there, I'm engaged, I'm doing an activity that he likes to do, and I'm trying to develop some closeness. I don't think doing that's going to make your kid tell you everything, because if they're telling you everything, there's probably a boundary issue anyways. Like there should be some stuff that's safe. But I do think that encouraging the closeness will encourage more open dialogue. I mean, really, like suicidal ideation should always be taken seriously. I think that's the answer. Because even if it's present, there's a reason why, right? So even if somebody's not going to act on it or there's no plan or intent, there's something that's fueling the thoughts, right? There's some internal thing going on, depression, something that needs to be kind of addressed with a professional so they can have a dialogue and a communication about like, hey, why do you feel like you don't want to be here anymore? Especially with adolescents, they're really impulsive. So I've seen some act on suicidal ideation and then come to me and be like, I didn't mean it when I took like the handful of Benadryl, you know what I mean? Because then they had to go to the hospital or whatever it is, or that was an impulsive decision in a moment where I didn't feel okay. And so I just would say like if you think that's going on, it's like they need help. And how do we find them the best help that they can get?
Yeah, it can be really upsetting to have that conversation with your child, and I've had that conversation with one of my children many years ago. So I know how that can bring up a lot of fear. And what I've learned through a few other therapists that we work with on these programs, I heard one of them actually respond to this question by saying that lean into it when you hear that, just to say like, okay, then shall we go to the emergency department? This is a serious thing that you're talking about doing, so this is serious. I'm taking it seriously. I hope that this is not something that will happen, but let's address it because I don't want to ignore this. So to just kind of lean into it. It's never something that we should be afraid of asking. Do you have a plan? I think there's a lot of misconception that like if by bringing it up, I'm going to sort of somehow trigger a response or trigger some action. That's not the case. It really does need to be put the light on it and talk about it. But Mike, go ahead. You have some thoughts, I'm sure.
I had the kind of suicidal ideation where I didn't talk about it to anyone at all. And I didn't call anyone. I didn't even plan on writing any letters. It was just something that I was dead set on doing, but I would delay and delay and delay. But once I did tell somebody, I really needed it to be responded in a serious way. I needed a therapist, psychiatrist. I needed all options to be exhausted in getting support for that because I knew that while I didn't want to take the step because I knew it would hurt others, that I was moving closer and closer over time to a place where I would be willing to do that. So I think you should take it very seriously and get that child all the help they can.
I just want to like add one thing too with Kim. It's like we take it seriously, but also like realize it's really normal. It's like a passive suicidal thought is like a thought that's like, I wish I wouldn't wake up in the morning. Right. And I think if people are honest with themselves, like that happens. And so like when it goes on, you want to treat it seriously, but you don't want to overreact. It's really important if somebody says that to normalize it, right? And come from a place of love, not from a place of fear or like, oh my God, we have to do something. It's more of a place of, okay, well, let's talk about that and then let's get you help, right? Let's do the appropriate thing, but from a place of not being reactive.
Go ahead, Dr.
I think also leaning in, as Kim used that term, I really like that, leaning into why are you calling this crisis line 3 times a week? Because maybe there's a need that needs to be filled there that can be filled in other ways, whether it's through therapy, whether it's through, some type of group intervention that allows your child to talk freely, that doesn't involve calling a crisis line. So I think I would really, have that open conversation with them about what are you getting out of this? What's kind of being shared, so that you can use that information moving forward.
We're talking about some pretty serious concerns with our kids. And I just want to remind you that therapy is not only important for our children, but for us as well. We really have to take a look at what kind of, perhaps we even had experienced some trauma, as parents. And so don't ever hesitate to reach out for help for yourself. We get so focused on our children, which is not surprising. We love them. We're responsible for them and until they're a certain age, all that. But to understand that sometimes, we can't homeschool some of this stuff. This is challenging. And so please take care of yourself, reach out for help. Just another plug for our parent partnership meetings as well. These are our support group meetings just for parents whose child, our parent group meetings are focused on substance use, but there's a lot of talk about mental health as well. There's so much co-occurring disorder in there, so it all is helpful when we get into these discussions around boundary setting and what's helping, what's enabling. And Lizzie, I love that you talked about that. And that is my go-to definition that I learned early on was, that helping is when they're not able to do it for themselves. Enabling is when they're perfectly able to do it for themselves. And that helps us, I think, a little bit with that distinction.
Yeah, I will say my overall with all the adolescents and the young adults that I've treated, the ones that fare better are when their parents are engaged in their own work, which looks like their own therapy or their own support groups or whatever. And it models the behavior that we're looking for from the kid, right? And so a lot of this is like, okay, like if I'm saying like, hey, this is really important for you to do, but I'm not doing it myself, there's an inconsistency with that messaging. And I just think parenting is really hard. We used to raise kids in groups of people, and it's become more and more 1 to 2 parenting dynamics. And so the more you find support, whoever you are, parent, child, sibling, usually the better you fare, right? And you learn things and you're open to conversations, and you can show up to the table. When I talked about people coming, you show up to the table differently, which then creates a different result. I will also tell you, we know statistically, if your kid struggles with mental health or substance use issues and you're engaged in that process of therapy for yourself or with them, family therapy or your own support groups, the outcomes are way better. So that I just always like, we don't have the best outcomes with substance use issues, unfortunately, but we do know one factor that can really change that is like if the family's engaged in doing their own work, because none of this is easy, and it's really easy for things to just get out of whack. So.
And I have to say, we talk a lot about social media impacting our children. It impacts us parents too, because we see all that perfectionism, all that like the idyllic family, the Norman Rockwell thing, and all that kind of stuff. And you both talked about, Lizzie and Mike both talked about how good you looked, and the whole family systems can look really so perfect out there. And then we start looking at in our own home and think like we're the only dysfunctional family. No, I got news for you guys. There's a lot of this out there. It's not necessarily dysfunction. This is the way we are. We're nuanced, complex people, and we struggle and we need each other, and we can't look and see these idealized views of what a family's supposed to look like. It's challenging.
Yeah, I think there's so many questions I had after you just shared that. It's like part of the problem of being a therapist. I'm like, okay, I have like 5 questions now to give you a better answer. It's hard to kind of give you an answer about your kid when I don't know your kid. That's why I think maybe if they're with a therapist, like engaging that conversation with the therapist can be really helpful, right? Like request a family session or be like, hey, we're having conversations about college and we just kind of want to do that in this setting and see what comes up. Can be really important. I also think like there's certain signs that a kid's motivated to go to college or not. And I don't know based on your share if your son had that. Like it's almost like kind of what you were saying is like he has this desire to go to college, but maybe the action isn't really backing up that desire. And so I would be curious as to like, okay, where did he apply? Was it him applying? How is he taking ownership of this decision? What does he do in his free time? Like, where is he at with his journey of like substance use and mental health issues? I also think, and I know Kim's a big supporter of this, community college is a great starter. Like, I think I think it's so underrated. But there is like, hey, let's try community college out for a year and see how you do. And then you can always transfer to a bigger university or out of the state or whatever it might be. So sometimes I think it's not like they have to take a year off. Sometimes it can be they just go to like a community college and they're more local to see how they do before you kind of send them off to a bigger university. Kim, I don't know if you want to say something.
Yeah, and what the advice that I heard early on in my son's recovery was, think of it as think of this person as not your child, but the example was given. You have an exchange student named Carl from Germany, and he's been living with you for a year. You thought he was going to go back to Germany after that, but he decided to stay here in the States and go to college. He's been smoking X amount of cannabis, and you now have to make this decision as to whether or not to support Carl in this next, phase of his life. What will you do? So we get so emotionally invested. We have so many things that kind of bias us when it's our own child, quite naturally. We want them to, there's always this urgency to like keep them on track. Like they're supposed to be in school at a certain amount of time, age in their timeline of life. And that's just, the emerging adult is getting older, so it isn't always necessarily an 18 or 19-year-old that is in the right place to be going off to college anyway. But the point is like to try to distance ourselves as emotionally as much as possible and see the big picture. Like, is this someone that should be financed? This is a huge investment, to go off to college. If they are someone in recovery, if they have not been continually using substances, now they're in recovery, there are collegiate recovery programs that are phenomenal, but you need to be in recovery. You need to have sobriety, and they all have different criteria. And I know Bob Lamb, who's with us, has some experience with those programs. But definitely looking at, and another way it was put to me was like, look at it as you're an HR department and you're deciding to put this person on probation. So here's what we're going to need to see there, fellow. We're going to need to see this sort of a GPA. We're going to need to see that you're not using substances. You're going to school, which I've heard it described in the movie, The Anonymous People. John Shinholzer describes college campuses as recovery hostile environments, so unless you're in a collegiate recovery program where there's a lot of support there, this is a pharmacy with a library in it in a lot of cases, so it's a lot of people are not there just to learn. They are there to do a lot of other things. So it's a tough decision. I shared earlier what went on with my son. He graduated undergraduate when he was 30 years old. I am 100% fine with that because he had maturity, he had sobriety, he did it under his own steam. I'd much rather that than push through 4 years when they're immature, not doing it on their own, not fully engaged, not there to learn. Thanks, Bob, for putting in the Collegiate Recovery Program website.
I can say something real quick about this. I think looking back, if my parents like genuinely asked me, like, do you want to go to Notre Dame? Which they did, but if they tried to have a real conversation with me about it, and I was capable of sharing that with them, my true feelings about it, I would have preferred to try out college at a community college. I would prefer to go somewhere more locally or somewhere that was more cost effective, where I could just do 1 or 2 classes to see if I could do it, see if I was ready. And right now, when I entered into recovery 2 years ago, I went to a local college and I just took 2 classes, and I just got the ball rolling. So yeah, I agree with both Kim and Lizzie. It'd be great if he could go somewhere to try it out and dip his toes in the water, but that environment will be volatile for somebody who's smoking weed, as you say your son is. But it's a very difficult thing, and I wish you the best.
Thank you all so much. Dr. Letts, thank you. This has been a great series this year. I'm really glad that we were able to do this.
Yes, thank you. And just a quick plug, we do have our family wellness fair that's coming up. That is March 13th, starts at 6 o'clock. It'll be at Enfield Elementary. It was a really popular event. We're glad Be Part of the Conversation is going to be there. We already have commitments from 20 other community partnerships that will be there, and we're hoping for some more in the upcoming weeks. So please join us at that event. Thank you.